Geopolitical empires, national economies, and modern corporations are all engineered frameworks. They operate under a specific logic, the logic of a game. For any systemic game to function, it requires four specific parameters: a defined environment, a rigid set of rules, an accounting mechanism, a scoreboard, and aligned incentives for the players. When rules are asymmetric or information is hidden, the system generates friction. This friction drove the high-stakes collapses seen in 19th century warfare, 20th century banking panics, and modern corporate bankruptcies. Conversely, when rules are transparent and player incentives align with the scoreboard, the system stabilizes and begins to produce compounding growth. To understand how this engine operates, we will deconstruct its mechanics across three historical arenas. Analyzing imperial geopolitics, the chaotic evolution of American monetary history, and modern corporate architecture reveals the repeating patterns behind how these organizational engines are built. In the 1800s, the British Empire's most valuable economic asset was India. Securing it meant navigating the geopolitical arena of Central Asia, an environment defined by severe imperial anxiety. This paranoia traced back to Napoleon's 1798 Egyptian campaign and a subsequent 1801 proposal by Tsar Paul of Russia for a joint 70,000-troop invasion of the Indian subcontinent. This map illustrates the logistical reality. A massive ground invasion was virtually impossible across thousands of miles of harsh desert. Yet in Kolkata and London, the map itself became a psychological weapon, collapsing vast distances and amplifying the perceived threat of a Russian invasion. The Russian Empire was driven by a different logic, rooted in the 13th century trauma of the Mongol invasions. Centuries of catastrophic subjugation encoded a strict defensive mechanism into their political culture. The British observed Russia expanding toward Siberia and diagnosed it as a campaign of conquest. In reality, Russia was attempting to construct massive geographic buffer zones to keep future invaders far from Moscow. Because both players operated with asymmetric information, they projected their worst fears onto the environment, basing strategic decisions on imaginary threats rather than objective reality. Since conventional armies could not traverse this terrain, the Great Game was fought by select individual proxies and spies. These agents mapped the geographic black box using highly localized methods. They used pocket compasses, disguised themselves as horse merchants, and secretly counted steps with beads. This flawed intelligence prompted the British to adopt an aggressive forward policy, moving military assets into this rugged terrain. This disastrous attempt to turn Afghanistan into a buffer state resulted in the total destruction of the British force during the First Anglo-Afghan War in 1842. Attempting to control a massive system by relying on proxies and hoarded, localized intelligence creates the very instability the players seek to avoid. We see the same systemic volatility in early American economic history, an environment initially characterized by a total absence of standardized rules. Look at this early continental currency note. Previously, American commerce relied on a fragile system of foreign certificates. This note represents fiat money, printed in such vast volumes to fund the revolution that it triggered catastrophic inflation, making it essentially worthless. Stabilizing the system required the mathematical engineering of a base unit. While Robert Morris proposed a complex fractional system, Thomas Jefferson advocated for a decimal system, dividing the new unit into 100. The dollar traces its history back to 15th century silver mines in the Czech Republic. Coins minted there, called thalers, set a standard of purity that the Spanish adopted and brought to the American colonies. Alexander Hamilton codified the rules for this currency in a 15,000-word architectural blueprint for the first Bank of the United States. He designed the bank to regulate the money supply and impose fiscal discipline. Currency and central banking are engineered rule sets designed to align disparate players and secure systemic trust. When established rules are dismantled, the system degrades. Congress let the first bank's charter expire, and Andrew Jackson vetoed the second bank in 1832, stripping the economy's regulatory anchor. The wildcat banking era was defined by unchecked proliferation. Thousands of local banks printed diverse notes, like these, and 40% failed within a decade. This created massive friction, forcing merchants to use thick banknote detectors just to verify local currency. Enforcing an artificial silver-to-gold ratio triggered Gresham's Law. Citizens hoarded gold, draining treasury reserves and causing the devastating panic of 1893. Saving the system required an elite intervention. J.P. Morgan acted as a private central bank, supplying gold to personally bail out the U.S. Treasury. Decades later, as the Depression decimated thousands of local banks, Franklin D. Roosevelt instituted the bank holiday, a forceful federal reset of the system's broken rules. Without a unified scoreboard, players inevitably crash the game, requiring extreme centralization to restore order. The organizational patterns observed in 19th-century empires and banking panics reappear at the micro level of modern corporate architecture. A business where information is siloed at the top recreates the same structural weaknesses that plagued the British in Central Asia. In this black box style, leadership operates in a fog of war. Employees act as blind proxies without understanding the organization's financial health. Open book management replaces this with a glass-like network where data flows equally to every node. This system relies on radical transparency. It ensures that every player, from the captain to the lowest-ranking sailor, understands the organization's financial status and its destination. Players must be taught the rules of the game through financial literacy, enabling them to interpret metrics like profit margins and debt-to-equity ratios. The scoreboard acts as a real-time diagnostic tool. It allows the team to identify operational bottlenecks immediately, providing a live view of the system's health. An engaged system requires decentralizing the intelligence. When workers understand the financial impact of their actions, they cease to be blind mercenaries and become strategically aligned co-players. Whether navigating the passes of Afghanistan, standardizing the ledgers of 1830s America, or optimizing a modern factory floor, the mechanics of the game remain consistent. The primary failure point of any organized system is information restriction. As seen in the high failure rates of 1830s banks and the strategic disasters in Afghanistan, opacity and information hoarding consistently drive systems toward collapse. Durable power requires radical education, a transparent scoreboard, and giving every single participant a direct financial stake in the outcome. Evaluate the environments you operate in daily. Look closely at the symmetry of the information, the transparency of the scoreboard, and the alignment of the system's incentives. Determine what kind of game you are playing and whether it is designed